At my husband's funeral, my son Daniel was at the microphone with his quivering voice and thanking another woman. "She was the only woman who was even remotely family to us," he said. The entire room turned towards the woman seated in the front row. The woman wearing the tight dress and perfect makeup with delicate tears balanced in her eyes. And me, the real wife, the mother. I sat in the corner, out of sight, out of hearing. When afterwards the lawyer informed me that my husband left everything to her, not a single penny to me, Linda Mallister embraced my son and smiled a victory smile as if she had already won. But then I pulled out the second wheel, and all of a sudden there wasn't anyone in the room smiling anymore. I never imagined that I would begin life again at a funeral. Robert passed away in a sudden car accident. He was driving into the city that morning in the midst of a heavy rain. They said the brakes failed on a curve, and the car crashed into a supermarket. He was gone within a matter of moments. The doctor said he didn't suffer, but I wasn't so sure he deserved such a gentle departure. We had been married for 40 years. I had imagined our marriage, while not passionate, to be something solid. One of those houses pounded by storms, toughened on the outside but still standing. I relinquished my career to toil in every nook and cranny of our home. He would always retort, "I can do it for you. You don't need to work." And I believed he said it. I stupidly thought it was a kind of love. At the memorial, I stood at the entrance of the chapel in his favorite charcoal gray wool overcoat and greeted guests. The wind blew. My fingers were icy. In spite of that, I smiled, trying to make his goodbye dignified and neat. Robert was so worried about the appearance, what other people thought of him. Even in death, I was still clinging to that tidy illusion for him. Daniel was at the podium. He's our only child. He's turning 33 this year and works as a back-end engineer for a tech company. He was wearing a dark suit, crisp. His voice was serious and his eyes were as firm as usual. As he read out a eulogy to his dad, he paused and his eyes reened. "There is one person I'd like to say a special thank you to," Daniel said, his voice shaking a little. The room fell silent. I clenched my handbag in my lap, my knuckles whitening. I thought he was going to say, "My mother." In that moment, I could have sworn I heard it rising in his throat, that long-anticipated acknowledgement. 40 years of collaboration, commitment to the house, nights sleeping at the hospital, all the unexpressed abnegations. I really felt that he had regarded me finally. But what came after sliced through me like a cutting tool, stripping that hope away in bits. An individual who had assisted my dad during his darkest moment in life, Miss Linda Mallister. A soft whisper went down the aisle. A woman in the front row stood up and massaged her eyes with a courteous nod. She wore a dark emerald green woolen coat, black heels, flawless makeup, and perfectly plaited hair. As she sat, those around her turned to look at her, interested and amazed. Sound burst in my ears like a detonation of silence exploded. Linda Mallister. I knew the name. She was Robert's administrative assistant in the company. He later made her a consulting partner, even included her for a time on the board. When I asked about her, he'd always downplay it. "She's a professional. Don't be paranoid." I remembered that year's Christmas party. She had brought me a glass of wine, grinning brightly, moving with the ease of a woman who belonged. I wrote her off then as just another sycophantic coworker. Looking back now, how ironic. Standing in the distance, someone was heard to say, "She's sitting so close like she's family." And my son had only said thank you to that woman at his father's funeral. I had the sensation of a chair falling from under me. My ears rang and the world hummed slightly. People came up to shake hands and say the same. He was a good man. Well, miss him. I nodded perfunctorily, like a machine saying lines that had been pre-programmed. I'd promised to stay through to the end to maintain appearances, but I heard Daniel whisper to Linda, "You're the one who's truly family." I nearly dropped the teacup in my hand. At that moment, I realized this funeral had nothing to do with Robert. It had to do with a hidden world I knew nothing about. And I was just a stranger, a left-out bystander. That night at home, I occupied the empty living room. When I took off the coat, I saw the satin ribbon was wrinkled, as though the last shred of dignity of my marriage had been thoughtlessly snapped. I sat at the dining table and stared at the row of empty chairs. Robert's chair was still in place. I hadn't moved it. He'd always been sitting there for years with his hand on the armrest, waiting for me to bring him his soup. Now it was cold and alone, and the armrest was cold too. There were still bottles of his favorite beer in the fridge. I never liked the brand. It was too bitter, but he'd buy a six-pack every week just for himself. It turns out that habit is the cruelest prison. I couldn't sleep that evening. I pulled out some old photo albums. In the photos, we were still young. There was light in his eyes. I used to smile easily then. I even saw an old employee ID when I worked as a financial consultant in his company. Short hair, confident, always second from the right in every board meeting. And then he told me, "You have to go." I'll set it all right. And I blindly obeyed. I closed the album and made myself a glass of water. The kitchen clock ticked on. I had thought all the pride, all the endurance I had put in keeping us together in marriage had gone underground when he passed away. What I didn't know, however, was that under all that was yet another layer of betrayal. The next day, every sentence that I heard in the lawyer's office was like a line in a script for life never asked to be read. The air reeked of ink and wood cabinets worn. There was a worn print of the Constitution hung crookedly on the wall, and sunlight streamed through the blinds to divide the floor into thin strips of light. It was Robert's law firm that he had named as such when he passed away. The senior attorney was a man in his 50s with a slow, heavy drawl. Every syllable was drawn out as if to underscore something unspoken. In accordance with the will signed by Mr. Robert Des Smith 3 years ago, he began with mechanical composure. The majority of his assets, including the main house in Summerall, the summer home in Nantucket, and the remainder of his personal finances, will be given to Ms. Linda Mallister. I wasn't merely surprised. I felt as though I'd been pushed off the center of my own stage and made to stand off stage in a dead light, wondering if I'd ever actually played the part I thought was mine. I looked over at Daniel. He was sitting bolt upright, his eyes fixed forward as though he were listening to a quarterly report. His fingers were precisely interlaced, not a sound of surprise, not a flicker in his face, as though he had known it all along. When the reading concluded, I stood up from my chair and walked to him. "You knew," I said in half-whisper, shaking voice. "Didn't you?" He looked at me with an oddly unruffled tone. Dad had his reasons. His reasons, I breathed. The words caught in my throat. What did 40 years of marriage mean to him? Daniel went quiet and then said, "He worked all his life." Linda stood beside him. She knew him. He spoke in low tones, almost on his knees. "You didn't." At that moment, I realized it. I had lost my husband, but I was losing my son. He wasn't defending his father's memory. He was overpainting the family tree and erasing me from the map. When I got home, I stood in the driveway for what felt like an eternity, the weight of my handbag buzzing my arm. I went into the bedroom and opened Robert's closet. His shirts, ties, and wool vests hung immaculately ordered with that same smell of courteous decorum. But what fictions were woven into those strands? When did he decide I was no longer part of the family? When was it that I forgot to bring home his favorite wine on our anniversary? Or before that, when I stepped down from being his personal financial advisor and merely a housewife? I started digging through the drawers for proof that I was not crazy. Old bills, photographs, receipts, abandoned business cards. I found a letter folder in the kitchen drawer that Robert had kept. There was a letter from the Nantucket Property Management Company. It was 6 years earlier. It was addressed to Linda. My fingers shook. I had gone to that oceanfront home countless times without realizing that I was only a visitor. That day, I walked across to Giselle's residence, our precious neighbor. She was a widow in her late 70s with a clear memory and a garden full of roses. When I said Linda's name, her face hardened. Linda, wasn't she the one Robert would bring to those symphonies? She inquired, raising an eyebrow. You didn't accompany them? I smiled weakly. My mouth was parched. I never much cared for social gatherings. Jella shifted in her seat. Oh, I always assumed that they were together. She's come through here multiple times. One time, she helped Robert put up the Christmas lights. I bristled. That Christmas, I was stuck upstairs with a swollen knee. Robert had told me that they had a neighborhood boy help him. Do you remember when they started gravitating toward each other? I asked. Giselle stirred her tea, remembering at least 10 or maybe 15 years back. I remember seeing her here around when you were away tending to your sister. I believed that she was a cousin or a friend of some sort. 15 years. I sat in Giselle's sunroom as a stranger who had come into the wrong house. All these years, I had planned for our retirement budget to the very last cent. I had selected his bathrobes, scheduled his physicals, and even plundered my parents' last savings to post bail for his company during a cash crisis. And he had been building golden bricks for another person's future in my own backyard without my knowledge. Returning home, I finally found an old cardboard box in the basement containing pictures. There was Robert standing next to Linda at a company event. His arm was across her arm, smiling his brilliant smile like never before. He seemed easier, younger, happier than he ever seemed at my side. And in one of the pictures was Daniel, just 18 or 19, standing next to them. His smile was tense but not uncertain. A corner of the photograph was marked with a circle. I prodded it gently with an eraser and exposed a pencil line. Our little family will become official one day. I swear I heard something crack in my chest. It wasn't a heart. It wasn't glass. It was something else. Something they refer to as trust, and it would never be intact again. That night, I had lit only one candle in the kitchen, and for the first time since Robert left this house, I put music on, slow, soft, unhasty jazz album. I started asking myself questions. Maybe I danced my whole life to his beat and never danced to my own. But not anymore. From now on, the beat, the music, the dance steps, all these are mine to choose. I had thought the worst was over. The will, the truth about the properties. Linda, sitting in the middle of it all, brazenly called family. That was humiliation enough for a lifetime. But little did I know that what would break my heart into pieces was Daniel. He is my only child. I had thought that no matter how strange the rest of the world got, he would still be mine. We had spoken about meeting at the town cafe, the same one he used to buy caramel dessert at when he was a child. He came in wearing a trench coat, his formality stiff and rigid, almost as if preparing for an interview as opposed to his mother. Before I could even get a seat, he placed his phone face down on the table. He always did that, a little cue that any commotion might be a reason to drop the conversation. "Why did you serve Linda a notice?" he asked bluntly. I took a deep breath and gazed at him. "Do you think I shouldn't have done it?" He shrugged. "She didn't hurt you. Dad gave her the money. It was his decision. Suing her makes everyone embarrassed." "Embarrassed?" I asked, my voice cracking with disbelief. "Daniel, your father lied to me for years. I gave up my career for this family. My friends for you. I sold even my mother's emerald ring just to pay for your college. Do you know how important that ring was to me?" Daniel frowned, exhaling with seeming annoyance. "You always bring it up like I owe you something." That was like a knuckle blow to the chest. Not anger, not even an argument, but distance. Certain and cold distance. "Dad told me that," Daniel went on slowly, his voice dropping, "that the best years of his life were with Linda. She understood him. She respected him. She did not question and criticize him all the time like you did. I scolded him because he had started to disrespect me, I declared. My teeth gritted. I rebuked him because he was in the wrong. Daniel shook his head like he was listening to a pointless sermon. You're too traditional, Mom. You've always had the belief that self-denial is a plus. But Dad did not need this kind of love. That is when I understood. It was not a surprising realization for him. This is how he had thought for years. He had just never voiced it until this point. I looked at him for a moment. All I could see was the boy he had been. The boy who fought to catch his breath during asthma attacks as I sat at his bedside through all the long black night. The bullied high school kid at school, whose dignity I defended as my own. The 17-year-old who was broken-hearted for the first time, and who sat beside me on the porch bench in silence until the stars came out. Did he remember any of that? I rummaged through my purse and pulled out an old yellowed photograph. That summer when you were 2, we went to the beach, I said to him, shoving the picture down the table. Your dad canceled at the last minute for a work thing, so it was just the 2 of us. On the picture, he's wearing bright red swim trunks and standing on soggy sand with a row of little, wobbly footprints trailing behind him. You were so scared of the waves. You'd wrap your arms around my neck and just scream, "Mommy, Mommy." You didn't know much about the world at that point in time, but you knew where you were safe. Daniel didn't look up and didn't say a word. I knew that you look up to your father, I continued. He was always dressed nicely, never screamed, always said the right thing. Did you ever think about the possibility that maybe I gave that nice-looking man the foundation? He looked up. No regrets, no tears, just one flicker of doubt. Dad did what suited him, Linda told me. She needed him to be needed. You were too powerful. Too powerful. That had been me. I recalled all of those nights staying late to pay up late accounts, the afternoons that I prepared dinner with a fever, the years that I held back tears over Robert's frosty coldness and smiled instead. That was what he meant by too strong. I put the photo back in my wallet and stood up. My voice was firm, but it resounded with profound firmness. You're right, I was too strong, and from now on, I'll reserve that strength for myself. Whatever he had to say next, I didn't hear. I stepped out the cafe door into the parking lot. It was raining, the drops impacting the windshield with a slow, thudding rhythm, an orchestra entirely made up of silence. I slid into the driver's seat and wrapped my hands around the steering wheel, sitting there for an enormously long time. I did not cry. I did not collapse. I just sat there knowing that what I had lost wasn't just a husband. I had lost my family, my marriage, even my son. But at the same time, I knew something else. I could no longer wait for someone else to define me. It was time to live for myself. Initially, I viewed Linda as a late-life mistake in Robert's story, an opportunistic one, a lady who insinuated herself between the cracks. But now it all makes sense. She was never a mistake. She had planned everything out. A rainy Saturday afternoon found me sitting in the kitchen with a mug of cold coffee in front of me, staring at her public Facebook profile. Her profile picture was her on the beach, gently smiling, the background tastefully blurred over as if she did not want anyone to see what was actually behind her. Her profile read, architecture consultant, classical music lover, and community volunteer, grateful for the gentle companionship of life. I clicked on her photo albums. Robert sat in a wicker chair holding a slice of lemon pie she had clearly made especially for him in the first photo. His smile is my favorite reward. Years ago was the date stamp, the same year I was bedridden with arthritis. Robert had told me then that his job was stressful and he would be driving around a lot. I had taken him at his word. I thought he was just trying to escape the stress of caring for someone. Now I recognized that he wasn't escaping me. He was living somewhere else without me. I scrolled down a bit more and found more pictures, known and unknown, all together. There was Robert standing in Linda's living room clad in the woolen jacket that I had presented to him. There he was helping her plant flowers and setting bonsai in her garden. And then a video. Robert was toasting her with a Christmas carol playing gently in the background. Daniel was there. I froze in shock. Daniel, who was still in college at the time, had longer hair and a blushing, boyish face. Linda had her arm over his shoulders and said, laughing, "Your dad must be proud of you." That's when I caught on. Linda was never just Robert's secret. She had been preparing herself for years as a member of our household. And I was the woman she would be replacing. I called Ruth. Ruth Lanier had been a friend of mine when I worked for Robert's company, one of a handful of women with whom I had stayed in touch after I left the job. She was part retired nowadays, helping her daughter with a grandchild and working the occasional freelance financial case. She answered on the second ring with the same energy she always had. "Maggie, my goodness, I heard about Robert. I've been meaning to call you." "Thank you," I said. I didn't stall. "Ruth, I need you to help me find something." She didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you suspect." I paused. My voice sounded calm, but it was firm. "I believe Robert used company funds for at least the last decade to buy properties for Linda, and there might be other unaccounted for transfers." Ruth went quiet. "You're not just fixing a marriage, Maggie. You're looking to expose fraud." "I want the truth," I said. "I've spent too long in the dark." We agreed to meet at her house in 2 days. In the meantime, I became a woman on a mission. I went to the bottom of the local library and examined Linda's summer ball property records. One house, one single-family villa in her name, date of purchase, 5 years back, at the very tail end of the company's employees' housing benefit project, the very same Robert was overseeing. I had been involved on that project. I remember making a joke there. "On the next trip, you take me too." He dodged the invitation. "You would not like it there." I then realized that the room was not reserved for clients. It was reserved for her. 2 days later, I visited Ruth's place. Her house was located in a quiet suburb, a light gray bungalow with a row of dead chrysanthemums at the entrance. She greeted me with lemon tea and opened her laptop. "I've looked up some of the ancient payment histories," she said, scrolling through 3 lines with the notation outside consulting support. "But the beneficiary company is a fake. There is no address." She zoomed in on one line. $50,000 paid in the same month you were at home recovering from surgery. My stomach curled. Ruth looked at me nervously over the frames of her glasses. "Do you really plan on doing that?" Most people would just rather let it go. I didn't say anything. I just copied a screenshot of the file to my flash drive. I drove home slowly. The sun pounded on the windshield vigorously, and the air was charged with the smell of early autumn. The radio played an old 60s ballad. The chorus was singing softly, "You only know the truth once you stop pretending." Yes, once you stop pretending, you have clear vision. I sat before the computer at home and downloaded Linda's Facebook pictures to a new folder. I marked it evidence. I was no longer the woman who concealed her emotions behind a stove. I was Robert's rightful wife, Daniel's mother, the woman whose life had been removed from her own biography, and the woman who would rewrite the ending. The second batch of letters from Ruth landed as I dried the kitchen sink. Sunlight filtered through the blinds and made new stripes on the countertop. I paused with a rag in my hand and thought about how that was what had maintained my marriage. Clean, still, until the kitchen ceased to feel like mine. The title of the email was short. 3 Suspicious Transactions, Key Preliminary Legal Feasibility Assessment. I opened it. A few familiar PDF reports filled the screen. Ruth had commented on them. The company's name, Quinte Consulting LLC, Linda's account. The payments, 3 over $350,000, cleverly timed 5 years apart, both occurring just outside the company's official audit periods. She added a notation. "This is inadequately explained. Unless documentation of receipt of services of like value can be provided, this would appear to be a fraudulent gift." There it was, the proof. A ball of resolve was knotted in my chest. I knew what I had to do. That day, I called a lawyer who was an expert in fraud and corporate law. "I have a whole list of questions," I said, speaking clearly and firmly. "I believe my late husband ran his company into the ground to pad the pockets of his longtime mistress." The lawyer was a woman named Michelle Robinson. She was mid-50s or so, and her voice on the phone was no-nonsense warm. She listened intently as I talked. "You need to give me everything you have," she said. "Every document, every email, every picture." I hung up the phone and started copying the files. When I finished, I had over 50 documents. I typed it all out, neatly stuck it in a folder, and headed to her downtown law office. Her law practice was located in a glass skyscraper, and I sat with a view of the Chicago skyline during my wait. When she entered the room, she smiled professionally and pleasantly. She sported a crisp haircut around her chin and a perfectly fitted suit. She took the folder, flipped through it, and nodded. "We will review this," she said. "I'll be in touch." "Thanks," I replied, looking at her. She cheated me and my son helped her. I would prefer that she pay each and every fragrance back. Michelle shoved her glasses higher on her nose. "We will do our best." The next few months were a whirlwind of appointments, emails, and legal proceedings. We sued Linda Mallister, and the case caused a stir. Robert's former firm, his lawyer, even his estate were dragged into the lawsuit. And Daniel, he took Linda's side. He was enraged. "You're spoiling his reputation," he accused me over the phone. "Daniel, your memory of your father is an illusion," I said to him. "He was a con man who employed money to defraud me, his wife, and the mother of his son." That is how it was. He hung up on me. I waited for him to call again, but he never did. It hurt, but I proceeded anyway. I had to. The case went to trial. Linda and her lawyer tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. They told me the money was for consulting fees. They produced fake invoices from Robert to her. We had the word of Ruth, and we had pictures of Robert on Facebook. I took the stand and told them what happened. I told them about 40 years of our marriage, about the sacrifices I had made for him and Daniel, and about the pain that assailed me when I learned the truth. The judge, who was a black woman in her mid-60s, looked at me with compassion. I think she was aware of what happens in the minds of women like me. In the end, the judge favored us. She ordered Linda to repay everything that Robert had given her, together with interest. The total came to over $1 million. Linda was forced to sell off the properties she had bought with the embezzled money. She became broke. She lost her job and her credibility. I never did see her again. And as for Daniel, he did not speak to me for years. Then, when my dad died, he called me. We met at the funeral and embraced. We began going out again. I shared the whole story with him, and he started to get it. It took years, but we fixed our relationship. He apologized to me. He explained that he was only rationalizing an illusion throughout. I hugged him and explained that I had believed in him throughout. And at this moment, many of us had tears in our eyes. Daniel walked up and hugged me softly. "Mom?" he smiled. "When did you learn how to give speeches so well?" I smiled back. I always was. "You just weren't paying attention." We both laughed. Everyone laughed. At some point during the party, I went outside for a quick walk in the garden. I stopped under the crabapple tree I planted 20 years ago.